Now we come to the next talk, which is very important for us as a society, because when we want to make sure that we move away from fossil fuels to sustainable energy, then we are talking about smart metering every now and then, every here and there. And the problem is, with all that, whenever you can control something from a distance, it's likely that you can exploit it from the distance. And now is the moment to ask to come on stage Krzysztof, who is an expert in the field. He's CEO of SEQRED. And yeah, please join me in applauding and welcoming Krzysztof.
Thank you. Can you hear me well? Okay, cool. Very good intro, by the way. You probably stole like 50% of my presentation. No, I'm just kidding. So yeah, a bit of introduction by myself, since this is my first time in this conference, and I really appreciate the opportunity. I am an engineer by education. I graduated with a major in software engineering. I am strategic consultant by experience. I spent like most of my professional life working for Ernst & Young and the Boston Consulting Group and advising customers and organizations in the CI, critical infrastructure operating domain, including energy, power and utilities, transportation, military, and public services, public administration services. Yeah, but privately, after my corporate life, I kind of dedicated myself to becoming a ninja warrior. Maybe some of you know, but this is like an American-based franchise. It's called American Ninja Warrior. It's like a very big show in NBC in US. It came to Poland in 2018, and basically, I'm very proud of that. This is a topic for a separate presentation, but I approached the challenge of actually participating and being in the show because it's not that easy. You just apply and they get you. You need to basically train, prepare without actually being sure that they get you to the show. So I approached it like a project and execute it, and I'm very proud of that. So as mentioned, this is a topic for additional presentation. So professionally, right now I lead like OT security team, and since 2018 we've been researching topic of advanced metering infrastructure. We kind of identified it back then like a niche, because like energy sector, especially in Poland, they didn't talk much about it. And considering the fact that our team involves security researchers who are very eager to put their hands on the like remotely but physically available and accessible devices, we're like, there must be something that you can break about it, right? So we started our endeavor in 2018. Since that, we've been in a number of projects for mostly DSO, distribution system operators, and we leveraged our experience from the research in the projects, and I wanted to share with you key insights. To give you a context, I wanted to tell a few words about one incident, security incident. It's 2018, winter, in Eastern Germany and Western Poland, DSO started observing local blackouts, so energy provision disruptions to the consumers. The information hits the news. Then basically considering the fact that the situation appears in distributed and multiple locations, and considering the fact that there weren't like very specific exceptional natural conditions noted and accounted for, there is one of the hypotheses about the potential causes investigated is cyber attacks. So basically when they analyzed incident responders, when they analyzed status of the grid, they have identified extreme fluctuations in demand for energy. So that was one trace. Then when investigated further, they have identified that basically for the population of consumers, it looked like they dropped their consumption in like coordinated way. In like very short time period. Analyzing in the meantime, DSO started receiving calls from remote and site maintenance staff, indicating that there might be some malfunction with the smart meters. When they investigated natural traffic for the smart meter subnetworks, they have identified that unauthorized, and basically independently of the DSO, there has been a disconnect instruction sent to the smart meters, which caused actually disconnection of consumption for the consumers affected. So the final forensic result indicated that there was a backdoor actually in the software and the firmware of the smart meter, which allowed for this kind of unauthorized action for the threat actor. The thing is that this is like a fictitious story. It's been actually, it comes from the novel by Mark Ellsberg. This is like Austrian novelist, and it was initially released in 2012. So the question is whether this is like probable and possible that it might happen. And in 2021, there was offensive operation targeted at North American utility, which actually resulted with such a situation. How did it come about? So it started with the phishing campaign. The phishing campaign armed with malicious Microsoft Office document, equipped with the auto-executable macro, and basically the macro and executed, and that gave initial access for attackers using Cobalt Struck Beacon. And this kind of access then needed to be escalated. They have escalated their privileges to domain admin using publicly available offensive tools like the LDAP search, Mimikatz, and PowerSploit. Then they used their administrative credentials to actually use Microsoft System Center Configuration Manager to distribute the policies to pre-selected workstations in order to establish CNC capability with those workstations, to have an access to those workstations. But those workstations were specifically pre-selected. It included users from groups like network administration, firewall management, control engineering, and smart meters operation. What happens then? They managed to extract information from those workstations. One was RDP logon credentials to the OT network. The other one was AMI, Advanced Metering Infrastructure Solution design documents. The third one was OT firewall configuration, and then HES. So the head-end system, so the centerpiece that basically is used as like central server for managing the population of the meters, credentials for the panel, control panel for HES users. So the thing was that they wanted to actually approach and get access to the OT network, but the RDP connection didn't work. The credentials didn't work because it required additional authentication factors, so good on the defender side. But in analyzing OT firewall configuration, they have identified like open path for communication between IT network and the Microsoft Windows patch management server, which operated in the DMZ between IT and OT network. And using this open path, they got access and hold on to the host hosting this patch management server, and using vulnerabilities, I don't have the specifics, using vulnerabilities of the host, they got hold of OT domain administration, domain controller in OT, and extracted credentials for HES user. Basically, the thing was that the HES credentials that they found before, they were actually for the read access and reading data from meters, but the ones that they found in OT domain controller, they were actually with the management access, and using this access and logging to the HES management console, they switched off the meters for the population of consumers. Another good information about this one is that was basically successful attack, but that was an advanced red teaming exercise conducted by Mandiant. The thing is that so far I didn't come across the documentation of successful cyber attack actually resulting with the blackout using this vector. It doesn't mean it's not real and it's not potential. It means that we were just lucky so far. So basically, why talk about it now specifically? Right now, since already like almost 12 years, I think, there's been a push for grid efficiency and managing energy efficiency across the grid. That's as specifically important when you consider renewable energy sources and the fluctuations of the energy that is produced by renewables, right? So in order to manage the grid and balance the demand with the generation, you need to have pretty much up-to-date and pretty much granular data about consumption. And this is key motivation for smart meters. So recognizing that EU has released directive, basically and simplified, and simply put, obligating member states to roll out the meters across majority of their location of their regions, and basically for till 2027, which is basically deadline set by EU, the market size for the smart meter devices is estimated to be at about over 200 million devices. So considering interdependencies between different components of AMI solution and interconnections between them, it's like a wonderland for potential attacker. Lots of opportunity to get access. Basically, Switzerland, Swiss energy industry is basically even more specific about it, but it's also like has like more let's say responsible approach, because it indicates specifically that 80% of the smart meter, of the metering infrastructure used at the consumers, but also at the generation and also storage facilities, must be the intelligent ones, the smart ones. But on the other hand, it instructs that those devices, they must have been subject to the security testing, and they must pass those security tests. So basically, it's even more notable than the directive by EU. So considering those aspects of the rollout strategies for smart meters, what is like the challenge from the point of view of cybersecurity? Based on our experience from the project, there are 4 common cybersecurity pitfalls for AMI, Advanced Metering Infrastructure. First is questionable security of the smart meter devices. The second one is the fact that DSOs tend to replicate secrets used to secure communication with the smart meters. The fourth one is basically, in many instances, the segmentation and the monitoring capability for the smart meter networks is insufficient to be able to detect efficiently potential cyber attacks, but also basically late or limited involvement of the cybersecurity department for sure at the early stages of the AMI implementation project. So how to go about that and how to fix this? First of all, how do you go about securing smart metering devices? I have to mention the Swiss approach to that, because so far, based on the research of the results of our research, Switzerland has got the most comprehensive and basically the best framework to securing the smart meter devices so far. First of all, it includes the regulatory framework, so basically defines obligation that only the meters that were successfully security tested can be installed. The second one is there's industry-led initiative that basically delivered already a standardized procedure for security testing of such devices, but also the other components of AMI infrastructure. The fourth one is space for actually recognizing the space for independent security testing labs. And the fourth one is basically recognizing certification authority and assigning the certification authority to the Federal Office of Metrology and Accreditation. And I think it's practical. I think it's rigorous, but basically it gives a good framework for enforcement of this regulation. And on the other hand, it's not discriminative, because basically it creates space for independent testing labs. But I think that the fact that regulations actually demand this kind of security testing being executed, and there's a federal office involved as like certifying authority, it gives a good background for enforcing this kind of standards. So yeah, but let's assume that you are a CISO or you are in security department in the DSO, and you basically your company bought a population, let's say like 30,000 of smart meters which are certified. Does it mean this is all you have to do to secure them? The simple answer will probably be you probably think right, is no. Because in one of the engagements, we had like the meters that were subject to the security test by vendors. But still, when we got this meter and when we tested it for the purpose of the DSO, we were able to identify 3 0 days, newly discovered vulnerabilities in something that is called GURUX. This is the LMS COSM stack implementation. The stack implementation is interesting because it's open source, but it's also OEM'd by multiple smart meter vendors, because you don't have to write implementation of the protocol on your own. You just use what's in there in the market. It's tested, but still we were able to find the vulnerabilities. And the thing is that the testing methodology, like the one issued by Swissmic, which is a very good one, by the way, but also the standards like the common criteria security profile for smart meters, they focus on defining security requirements like that the equipment should fulfill. Basically, they don't give like the detailed guidance on what kind of tools and tactics should you use when testing this kind of devices. So that can result with the fact that you are not sure when you are on the security side and you try to secure this infrastructure that the test tools and the test methods that were used reflect actually your threat profile. So basically, the tools and the methods that can be used by the threat actors that you have in your threat model. So that's why it's very critical to understand, to not just accept the fact that the device was certified, but to stress the fact that you need to cooperate with the vendor or this testing lab to understand what scope of the testing was actually applied to the device. So and make sure that the scope of the testing covers your own risk model that you have for the devices. If there's a gap, you should fill it and include this kind of additional testing in the AMI rollout project. The second one of the potential vulnerabilities that can be discovered is related to the misconfiguration. We basically tested in one of the projects. We were engaged to test production configuration of the meters. The meter on its own was already tested, and the certificate indicated that it has non-volatile memory encrypting capability. But the fact was that we discovered unprotected, quite sensitive data in the meter memory, because this kind of data, which are about APN configuration for the mobile modem for the meter, when actually extracted from the meter, when you have physical access to the meter and used with the SIM card, which is in many cases unprotected, give you access to the DSO network. So the thing is that when you just consider that the meter has certain capability to encrypt the memory, but you don't test the actual configuration that is in there ready for production, you are not sure that this capability has been applied and your requirements has been fulfilled. So I certainly recommend including testing this final production configuration of the devices before the rollout, apart from the testing, from the certification. The second aspect that I mentioned is basically about reusing secrets. So the LMS COSM standard requires for individual meter to have 4 different and distinct association passwords. It also assumes that for the purpose of securing communication with the meter, you need to have about 10 different keys, encryption keys stored in the meter. And so considering installation of 30,000 devices, you end up with something like 120,000 distinct passwords and 300,000 distinct encryption keys, cryptographic keys. So it gives like 500,000 secrets to manage, not to mention the history that is often required to be stored in the meter. So it's quite a complex challenge to manage this amount of secrets, right? So in many cases, oftentimes we saw DSOs cutting corners in implementations of AMI and basically reusing passwords and reusing keys for the population of the meter. The result is that if you are an attacker and you get hold of one of the meter, basically that means that the bar significantly is lower for the access to other meters in the population, which employs reused passwords or keys. So how to solve this? There's no simple answer, but there's practical one. First of all, the LMS COSM doesn't come with the ready-to-use framework for the solution architecture for managing keys. It just gives capability for transporting them and replacing them. But so basically, in order to make sure that you cover this kind of this space of risk, you need to for sure involve experienced PKI architect in the project. And I would also recommend working with the vendor, with the AMI components vendor, which already has experience integrating their HES solution with the key management solutions. I know that there are some vendors that do that have experience in that, and that are successful. I would certainly leverage this kind of partnership in order to cover this potential entry point and this point in potential attack surface. Yeah, and network architecture. So how do you go about building like secure network architecture? So first of all, you want to make sure that in the subnet that is built of devices connected via 3G GSM modems, you should use dedicated APN. I know that might be obvious for you, but we found instances of the subnets that were actually claimed by the network operator to have been built on the dedicated APNs, but we still managed to find the smart meters of different DSOs in those subnets. So this is one, use dedicated APN. The second one, in order to limit potential for the pivoting during the attack from 1 meter to the population of the meters, you should establish like the virtual point-to-point communication between meter and HES. And this is basically most often done by using GRE or IPsec tunneling. That's very efficient. And when you work on it with your mobile network operator, that would be quite sufficient control mechanism. The other one is ensuring capability to monitor the network for the purpose of identifying potential anomalies related to potential attack. And this is basically placing IDS on the edge device on the side of the HES. Quite straightforward, but basically you should consider IDS which has capability to analyze and work on the DLMS COSM protocol. And last but not least, device fingerprinting, because what happens, in many cases, the SIM cards that are used for the smart meters, they are not secured with PIN codes. So whenever you take the meter off the wall and take the SIM card and use the APN configuration data, you can connect your own modem to the subnet. In order to detect such situation, we recommend for DSOs using like a device fingerprinting and periodically monitoring the subnets with the smart meters for the presence of devices not matching the fingerprinting. The fingerprinting is basically about defining like what kind of ports, for example, the device has, the smart meter usually has open and such characteristics. Yeah, so a cartoon, but inspired by life. Based on our experience, for big business initiatives driven by the business in the energy sector, security is either engaged late or not at all in such initiatives, especially at like early stages or the first stages of the rollout process. So we saw security requirements completely omitted from the scope of the project. We saw competence security department involved at the testing phase of the project. So basically, in such case, security ends up as like at least as being a naysayer and basically delaying the rollout and the implementation of the business priorities. And in the worst case, they are like showstopper if there's like huge risk involved in the implementation. So yeah, so probably some of you might say, yeah, this is obvious, like, you don't need to tell us that, we are not the right crowd, business should be addressed with this communication. But I saw like two patterns of actually behavior by CISOs. One is the pattern when CISOs, they mind their own business, and when, let's say, business department announces new initiative and they invite invites CISO for consultation. The CISO gives guidance. Some CISOs, they just put down the procedures and the guidelines, and they expect business to just comply, and that's it. And the other ones, and basically I like this approach the best, they just show up in the business initiatives uninvited. I actually saw a couple of guys like that in the energy sector, and they actually got to know about particular initiatives related to the smart meters from myself, because I got to know about it from Siemens, which basically approached me whether I can secure this installation. And I called CISO and, hey, do you know that your business is basically working on this initiative? And he was like, I don't know that, but thank you for letting me know. In 2 days' time, the business already had to put him on board, because he escalated that to the CEO, that this initiative happened without him involved, and the CEO was aware of the risk profile. So I encourage you, to advise people or yourselves to be on the side of proactive CISOs, because in the end, it's about our integrity to ensure that we do our best to protect business, even if they don't want, they need to be protected. So that would be my last take on this. So yeah, I try to be as fast as possible. I hope not too fast, but we still have time for the questions.
Thanks, Krzysztof. Very interesting presentation.